Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, we're looking at the second season of angry culinary drama The Bear, and then we'll be looking at the first storyline of Damn Them All, a new urban fantasy comic by podcast favourite Cy Spurrier and Walking Dead artist Charlie Adlard. But before all of that, Alistair, what else have you done?
Well, I've been catching up on something we've discussed on the podcast before, which is, using my Disney Plus subscription, I've been diving into more recent series of What We Do in the Shadows. I think I might be slightly behind what's actually currently available, I think possibly in America, because it's not all up on Disney Plus yet. But I have been motoring ahead with the season since we last discussed it as a main review segment. And I guess my takeaway is that it is worth sticking with. It's, they keep up the humour. It's probably not quite the heights of maybe the first season, but I don't know, it's difficult to keep a show fresh. But what I do like about it is they do actually find, new sort of comedy dynamics in each season that kind of keeps it fresh and interesting, considering it's basically the same characters in largely the same circumstances. So that keeps it good, and I think it's definitely worth sticking with.
Yeah, I've seen up to the end of season 4 of this, which I think is what's on UK Disney Plus. I believe the Americans might be rocking through series 5 as we speak. But yeah. Season 4 was pretty fun. I enjoyed the silly Colin Robinson storyline. This is, for those who have seen it all, this is the season where he becomes a child, which was ludicrous and led to some very, very stupid visuals, but it was funny. Have you got to the end of season 4? Yeah.
I'm up to date with what us lowly British people are allowed to watch. So I've seen the end of the plot line with Colin Robinson as a kid, which definitely probably was the highlight of the season. There were some very silly bits, but also making one of the main characters a child again allowed them to inject a kind of new energy into the show with the same characters.
Yeah, I think What We Do in the Shadows does have the sitcom need to pivot back to, I don't know, the classic setup at some point. Like, at the end of season 3, there was what seemed like quite a big change to the setup.
Yeah.
And then I think everyone had just sort of come back and resumed their normal positions, apart from Colin Robinson being a child, by the end of the first episode. On the one hand, it always feels slightly disappointing. On the other hand, the show is what it is, I guess. And the only character who seems to be allowed any, real hard growth is Guillermo, which may well be a reflection of the fact that he's the only one in the show who's actually human.
Yeah, also, he is kind of the main character, the one we see through him to the kind of the setup. And again, there's a sort of, he's sent off in a new direction at the end of that season, but I am probably fully convinced that, within an episode of the next season, we'll probably be back to the setup of the vampires living in a house with Guillermo looking after them. Yeah, as you say, they seem very keen on just looping back to that setup. I guess that is what people want from the show, so that's what they're willing to give the viewers.
Some sitcoms do get a certain amount of mileage out of pivoting to drama or emotion. American sitcoms especially, things like Friends and The Office, have that sort of sad, sincere bit, and I do kind of respect What We Do in the Shadows' commitment to actually just being quite silly most of the time. Like, the pivot to sort of sadness or tear-jerking or genuinely mawkish moments don't come around that often. It often does just allow itself to be stupid or to just be cynical.
Yeah.
And I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, they don't really do much in the way of character arcs or character developments, as you say with Guillermo, although they do max out on basically silly turns of events that are very, very funny. Possibly my favourite episode in this season is when they end up on a home improvement show, and which Laszlo, Matt Berry, who is the best thing about the show and very, very funny, obviously for some reason really loves this crappy American home improvement show. But the kind of directors and editors must have watched a gajillion hours of these shows, because they absolutely nailed every single element of these asinine American home improvement shows, and how they feel the need to introduce about 20 cuts into every 30 seconds of footage unless you get bored. So they absolutely nailed the look, and obviously just the ridiculousness of the vampires being on a home renovation show, getting their horrible cursed mansion renovated into a completely tasteless, bland modern home.
Yeah, I do think, a lot of the appeal of this show is Matt Berry doing his Matt Berry voice and saying, "But," or whatever else it is he says. I know it's not season 4, but the Jackie Daytona episode was still the ridiculous episode from season, I think it might be 3, when Matt Berry ran off and assumed an alias.
Yes, and became a coach of a high school girls volleyball squad. They managed to cram into about 10 minutes of the middle of an episode, like an entire sports inspirational movie. To be fair, that was probably a high point for the whole show overall, partly because they broke out of the, the kind of tight constraints they have and took one character out of their circumstances put them in a different one. It's also because they had Mark Hamill as well, being hilarious.
Yeah, that one was great. I don't think there was anything in season 4 to quite rival that, but it's always a good time. They've got to the point on the sitcom spectrum where they feel like, I don't know, like friends, or at least like reliable company, and it's kind of just fun to hang out with them. Although you do appreciate the episodes where they try and push more of an actual plot. There is a certain amount of just hangout value. I think they've reached at that stage. The point of the sitcom where it's just nice to see them.
Yeah. You're kind of sort of emotionally invested in the characters. Yeah, although I guess you can't help but feel sorry for Guillermo and how much he's kind of ignored and mistreated by Nandor the Relentless. So yeah, although again, it is just the high silliness of the whole thing is quite good, and obviously all the cast members are really hitting those ridiculous comedy moments very well. That kind of keeps it funny.
And obviously one of the other beats they hit in season 4 is Nadia opening a vampire nightclub, which is partly funny just because it's one of these tropes that's in all the movies, or at least certainly famously in at least one of the Blade movies, where the vampires go to a vampire nightclub and drink a load of blood that comes from sprinklers in the ceiling or something.
I've listened to a lot of podcasts that I've seen a few podcasts that have discussed that film and all made the point that like sprinklers that would spray blood, it would just smell like the worst thing like ever. Imagine people, sweaty leather-bound people caked with actual blood, which doesn't smell very nice. Like, and also the practical effects of getting it to work are quite funny. But also I like the fact that like her club is just terrible, and the main attraction is basically like performing children singing songs because vampires like novelty acts for seemingly no reason.
Oh yeah, and that's one of the incredibly stupid moments that just makes the show work. Yeah, I'm assuming season 5 will appear on Disney Plus at some point, based on previous years, probably around the time it finishes in America, and I will, of course, watch it.
Yeah. The whole thing, I believe, has been broadcast in America, so it's probably coming out at any point. Yeah, but they seem to have slowed down a bit on the celebrity cameos, which is what in season 4. Although I did appreciate an episode that had like Sophia Coppola playing herself, which was very funny.
I think that's what you get when you're at like the height of your success after you've had like a red hot first season. Yeah. There's certainly some celebrity cameos in season 2 of The Bear.
Yes. For example. Yes, I'm sure we'll be coming to those. But yeah, not quite so many like famous faces, such as like in the third season where they had like Mark Hamill or David Cross like popping up. But I don't know. Overall, I think the show's worth sticking with. It's maybe not kind of like making moves in the comedy world, or making waves in the comedy world, I suppose, as it did in its early days. But I'd certainly recommend sticking with it, just at least for Matt Berry, who is hilarious, and I'd watch him basically anything.
It is nice that he's got a vehicle to be stupid in.
Anyway, I've been catching up with the mockumentary Vampires. Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I've been reading a book. I read a book called Poison Chalice by Porrick Oimoloid, which was a book from a few years ago now about the Miracle Man legal saga, which readers of comics will be familiar with, and I guess I will now attempt to summarise very briefly without boring our entire listenership rigid. Basically, there was a character called Marvel Man in British comics in the 50s, who was actually a knockoff of Captain Marvel, who was himself a knockoff of Superman. But anyway, Marvel Man was sort of reasonably successful for a bit, but ended up sort of vanishing without a trace, without leaving much real cultural footprint. Basically, the gimmick was that he was a child who could turn into an adult superhero, which is exactly the gimmick of Captain Marvel. I mean, yeah, Captain Marvel and Marvel Man, it's not a big leap, really. And this was pre-Marvel Comics, I should stress. The word Marvel had actually existed in comics before. So yeah, in the 80s, this property was revived for a sort of deconstructive new version by a then new to comics Alan Moore. It was one of his, I don't think it was his earliest gig, but it was one of his earlier gigs. Certainly one of the first in his sort of deconstructing superheroes subgenre of his oeuvre. And yeah, so he had this whole notion of Miracle Man, the kid, having grown up, and after having lost his powers for a while, suddenly rediscovering his ability to turn into a superhero, only to find that his relationship with this superheroic alter ego gets a bit weird, and his wife might actually prefer the superhero to him, and it all gets a bit strange. And yeah, this was published by one publisher who fell apart, and then a second publisher who also fell apart, and also because it's of its obvious derivative nature and the fact that it was named Marvel Man originally, and then they had to change the name to Miracle Man because of a lawsuit from Marvel Comics, even though Marvel Man as a concept actually predates Marvel Comics by about 10 years. And as a result, despite this being a hugely acclaimed series, which had like 26 issues by Alan Moore, and then Neil Gaiman came on at the height of his mid to late 80s fame and did about 10 issues as well, the whole thing just sort of fell apart and vanished into a massive legal swamp until it was recently resurrected by Marvel Comics, who spent a lot of money sorting out the whole thing. thing. Anyway, yeah, it's a long comics-related legal storyline. It's kind of legendary in comics fields for its complexity, convolutedness, and stupidity. So trying to explain it verbally on a podcast was certainly a challenge. And yeah, I read a whole book about it. It was really good. You probably have to have a certain level of interest in, if not this specific comic, then certainly, the general culture around comics. But for a long book about a legal case, it was quite interesting.
So this is non-fiction that's trying to basically make the complex wranglings of copyright law accessible to, the person in the street.
The book, I think, is mostly entertained by the sheer stupidity of this particular case, which built because one publisher had some ridiculous setup where the creators each owned 30% of the rights to the property, and then it got sold to a different publisher which sold parts of the rights to someone else, and then someone else in the 90s insisted they owned Miracle Man even though they actually didn't, and ended up having to get taken to court over it. It was a series of ridiculous events. Yeah, there's a series of quite entertaining quotes from various comic professionals from the 90s remarking on how they think Neil Gaiman mostly won due to the all-female jury, which is certainly a take, mostly because of the author's good eye for things like that. It's quite a fun read.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these stories, you can take very complex topics, and the way you make them accessible is, finding the humorous elements, but also finding the human connection, because behind a lot of this, it's about, usually behind the technical legal wrangling are people who set these processes in motion. I mean, we saw that in Tetris, which we reviewed earlier this year, a game about the legal complexities of licensing the intellectual property out of the Soviet Union. But yeah, obviously by making it about the people behind them and their motivations, you can kind of, link the story. You can make the story accessible.
Yeah, plus, as someone with an interest in comics, it's also, it's genuinely educational. There's an area of British comics I really knew quite little about, the exciting world of Warrior magazine in the 80s. So it was quite interesting from that account as well. To be honest, the last quarter of the book where it gets a bit more into the modern age, and it kind of has to, by necessity, end up reproducing a lot of stuff from like comics blogs and Twitter and stuff, is where it gets kind of a bit less interesting. It's just more fun when it's talking about, backroom gossip and interview quotes and stuff from like interviews the author's done in person. When you inevitably have to start reproducing tracts of text from Twitter, it's just less fun. But still, it's an entertaining read, and that bit's quite a small percentage of the book, because most of this stuff happens pre-internet.
I often find that also people, if it's further in the past, people are more likely to be honest because it's kind of all water under the bridge and there's less reputational risk. And also a lot of old people are basically like, I'm over the hill, careers ended or it's in its twilight years, I'm happy to spill the beans. So yeah, I don't know, the same thing can happen with rock memoirs when people are very happy to dish the dirt about stuff that went on in the 70s, but sometimes get a bit cagey when it comes to like recent stuff that could probably again land them in court.
Yeah, that's probably it, to be honest. There's a certain amount of candid honesty in some of the older stuff, whereas once you get to the modern stuff from like Twitter and blogs and stuff, everyone's got kind of an eye on their personal brand, as we say in the awful present day.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting character with an interesting history. I don't know much about it, only basically what we've discussed at one point. My one piece of trivia, though, is that Captain Marvel is old enough to be referenced on the White Album. So yeah, going all the way back to 1968. Is it Glass Onion? One of the tracks on the White Album does actually reference Captain Marvel. So I don't know, it seems like an artifact from a different era if it's mentioned in the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, Captain Marvel's older even than that. He was around in the early 50s. He's one of the first superheroes, predated only by, Batman and Superman and a few of the other very, very early ones. And of course, he predates Marvel Comics, but it turns out their large amounts of money and crushing legal powers mean they can have him for that anyway, apparently.
Well, they've got Disney money behind them, I suppose. So yeah,
I don't think they did at this stage, but yeah, now they do now, certainly. And Captain Marvel's been basically out of use for a while, mostly because Marvel, I think, when the trademark Captain Marvel came free due to the old version not being published for a while, Marvel immediately started publishing a series of comics called Captain Marvel every few years, even when they weren't very successful. I think the first version of Captain Marvel from Marvel Comics to actually succeed is the Carol Danvers version in the 2000s. There were about 5 versions before that, most of which have not left much cultural footprint either. One or two of them were good comics, I think, but they haven't really taken off.
So it's not until the 2000 we get the iteration that's been used in the films, which is the only one I'm familiar with.
That is the version that has stuck, even though it is technically the 4th, 5th, maybe even 6th Marvel Captain Marvel. But yeah, if you're into comic history, this is an extremely good book for whatever it's worth. It's fun, it's breezy, as I say, especially for a book about a legal case.
It does sound very interesting, yeah. Next up, this episode, we will be discussing the 2nd season of The Bear. This time, Carmy, Richie, Sydney and co. are planning on turning their diner into a slick Michelin-starred restaurant. But time, their own self-doubt and their fractious relationships are against them. We've seen the entire 2nd season of this comedy drama that's on Disney Plus in the UK. Nick, What did you think of it?
Yeah, I loved season 1 of The Bear. I think it was number 2 in my top 10 TV shows last year. I believe we reviewed it. I very much liked its constant whirling chaos and sense of emotions forever on edge. But I did still come away thinking, does this need a second season? And happily, yeah, they did it. They made it work. They did it cleverly, I think, by somewhat changing the formula, whereas Bear season 1 was known for its, as I say, its endless spinning chaos and arguments and shouting and whirling cameras. Here they actually give us a bit of quietness, a bit of time to reflect. There is this sort of rush to open, but it's not quite as chaotic for the most part as the first year was. With one key exception, which I'll get to, there isn't really that much of the trademark Bear chaos until the finale of the season, when the restaurant finally has its big opening preview night thing and things finally kick back into high screaming gear. And yeah, it works really well. It gives it a different rhythm that makes you feel, okay, they're not just repeating themselves. Some of the character study episodes are maybe a bit more compelling than others, because they do take a bit of time in a lot of the middle episodes to take a bit of a breather and a bit of downtime with the individual characters. But yeah, when it's good, it's really fucking good. And the second half of the season, I think, is amazing. Fully up there with the first one for me.
Yeah, they definitely varied it up for this season, partly because the shtick of the first season was restaurants, especially restaurant kitchens, are chaotic places where big personalities butt heads and there's lots of shouting and throwing stuff and things like that, which is probably fairly true to reality. And yeah, in this season, the kitchen is not in use. It's closed for most of the season because they are trying to redo the entire restaurant and reopen it. So that creates a whole different type of tension, which is, yeah, the classic race against time. They've got more work than they can do and not enough time to do it in. Yeah, which is good. But also, like, again, the first season built to, like, a big emotional climax with, the basis of the characters were all at odds with each other, and they found a way through it at the end. And then, again, what they didn't do with this season is just, again, like what we do in the shadows, reset to basic, now everyone hates each other again. They had to find new ways, for drama. And some of that was basically to show characters growing, which I really liked, how they weren't afraid to basically take characters on sometimes what felt like quite a radical character journey. Possibly my favourite, Richie, who, in the first season was the blue-collar guy opposed to anything that smelled of pretension or, almost a kind of reverse snob character. In this, going on a journey, including working at a 3-star Michelin restaurant and actually discovering there he understands elaborate gastronomical craziness and, how it can have a place in his world and ending up as a different person because of it. So I like that.
I think a lot of Richie's journey, which I fully agree is one of the best parts of the whole season. The episode where he spends, which focuses mostly on him spending a week working in this incredibly high-level restaurant, could well be one of the best TV episodes of the year. Full thumbs up for that episode. Yeah, you wouldn't think a quite angry man finding peace by working in a restaurant would be so touching, but it moves you in a weird way. Like, I think it's, as I think someone says during the episode, someone describes the idea of, like, was it radical service? Or sort of this idea of finding fulfillment by serving others, so that Richie can, feel like he's contributing and helping and has a role in the world and doesn't have to be so miserable and angry all the time. And it works, and he actually, and as well as that episode, which is really good, it's also very well handled when he goes back to the regular setting and the regular cast and actually enacts this transformation and becomes a different kind of person, although still recognisably Richie. It's incredibly well written, it's incredibly well played by Ebon Moss-Bachrach, and great stuff. Although there are a lot of other good bits as well, that was a highlight.
Yeah, that was definitely a highlight for me. And also, what is great about this is, as you mentioned, like the characters being detailed and going on journeys. You've mentioned the performance has been great from all the cast. The other thing is that what this show, I think, also really reminded me of Better Call Saul, which did this well, which is they never go for the obvious plot twist, or they never go for the drama where you think it's going to go. So the obvious example would be Richie, the blue-collar guy who's kind of maybe insecure about, how small his horizons are, but is also incredibly proud. Goes to work in a very, very slick, like I say, Heston Blumenthal 3 Michelin star restaurant. And you're just waiting for the moment when he flames out impressively. And it doesn't happen, but there is still, sort of drama and tension to it, and there's growth to his character, and he has conflict. But what happens is not what you expect. There's always like a different twist, which is again, Better Call Saul was very good at, like, the characters never end up in the place you think they're going to end up. There's always a surprise for you, and that's what I like about this show as well, because at this point in my life I've seen so many TV dramas, predictable plot twists can be spotted quite easily.
Like there's another Spotlight episode where one of the chefs goes to Copenhagen to become amazing at doing desserts. And he's got a sick mother who appears in a lot of sad lingering shots, and you do spend a lot of the episode waiting for the moment where he has an amazing time learning about dessert and then gets the call to say his mother's passed away, which does not in fact happen. The show is very careful to slightly subvert that.
Yeah, I love the Copenhagen episode, partly because it was sort of quieter and a bit more reflective than the usual Bear drama tempo of shouting and fast-paced and high emotions. I think partly to reflect that character. He's the quiet, calm, together one of the bunch. So the episode focus on him is quieter and calmer, which again is a nice touch from the showrunners there.
Yeah, but I think you're right. They do a lot of good sort of serene moments. Like it sets where he lives anyway on this boat when he's in Copenhagen, and it's on water, and it's quite sort of weirdly soothing in a strange way. Not at all like spending an episode with Richie, but yeah, it works. Yeah, you have to admire the sort of subtle twist or the inversion in the course of the season where they kind of start to set up Richie as a guy who could actually be like the rock of the whole restaurant, while Carmy, the alleged star, goes somewhat off the rails in a slightly strange and unpredictable way.
Yeah, exactly. It's not what you were expecting to happen at all. And it's not also just rehashing the drama of the first season when Carmy and Richie were just totally at loggerheads. One's the blue collar everyman who just dislikes or just mistrusts anything that smells of pretension. One's the kind of elite world class chef interested in pushing boundaries and pushing taste, which obviously there's a straight source of tension there. They sidestep that by having them both kind of being on the same page for this, or more actually finding a common ground where they can do both. I like the fact that they're nice, very hipster restaurant that is going to serve only like a tasting menu and have a Michelin star. We'll still keep the little sandwich window so that the local people, the teachers and bus drivers and whatever can still just get a good quality sandwich as well. That's a nice little touch.
Yeah, and I think the journey with sort of the main character Carby this year is kind of interesting. He's not as front and centre in the whole show, because as I say, there's quite a lot of going off and spending an episode with someone else, while Carmy's maybe only in one or two scenes. But there's an interesting sort of two sides of this, in that they have Carby's main plot this year, I guess, is that he, meets a girl and has something resembling a healthy romantic relationship for the first time. Well, first time we see it on this show, possibly the first time ever in his life. And it sort of messes him up in a way. And it's a genuinely interesting, I don't know, is dilemma the word? I guess it's a word. It's a genuinely interesting dilemma in that, on the one hand, you want the lead character to be happy. On the other, his happiness is clearly interfering with his ability to be a sort of obsessed maniac that you apparently have to be to succeed as a restaurateur.
Yeah, or at least at the extreme high-level restaurateuring that he has. I mean, it's sort of subtly dropped in various times that he, maintained the 3 Michelin star status of the restaurant he took over, which is an enormous accomplishment.
I don't know, I suspect maybe the journey in the third season will presumably be Carmy working out or realising that he can both have a vaguely sane personal life and somehow enact his dream without having to drive himself mad. But yeah, the finale this year, when it does finally collapse back into chaos, it's killer again. Carmy having what looks like one of the worst days of his life. Certainly I would not wish that on my worst enemy. There's a moment where you think they might paint it as an inspiring moment of the team coming together to help him, but they just smack him down harder. It's actually quite brutal.
Yeah, they save the kind of the drama you're used to for the Bear just for the end to bring it back. So this is a season of the Bear. That sort of tension that Uncut Gems, the only thing done it well, when the stress level and the tension builds up so much that the show actually stops kind of being fun to watch. It's just actually quite a stressful experience, which it was just communicate very, very well.
Yeah, it's a sort of soft, loud thing where, because they've actually given you a break from it, you've actually honestly almost forgotten quite how bad it is.
Yeah, exactly. And the other great thing about the Carmy character is that good drama comes about when you have a character. The character is pretty much offered something that will make them happy and fulfilled, in this case, fairly obvious one of a healthy, loving relationship. And the character finds a way to throw it all away and turn it down. Now, if you can do that in a way that the audience is totally on board and understands their decision, even though everyone is screaming Carmy, just be happy, for God's sake, for once. But you also completely understand why he does what he does. That makes great drama. Conversely, it all falls apart when it just feels forced and characters just kind of give up things because that's to create drama. That's when you get the sense of the characters being yanked around like chess pieces. But yeah, this show again, everyone feels like a real person. Everyone feels like they're driven by a complex maelstrom of conscious and subconscious forces that sometimes drive them to act not in their best interest.
Yeah, it's very good at getting an idea of characters across, even when you don't see them that much. One of the most emotionally brutal scenes in what is quite a brutal finale is between two characters who barely appear in the series. It's Carmy's mother and his brother-in-law, I guess. Yeah, and it's a heart-wrenching scene, and those characters are not major characters.
No, but I guess the mother, which I suppose is an important thing that must be discussed, is an important element that's introduced in this season, because also essential to this show is it's Carmy's restaurant, I suppose. He inherited it from his brother who killed himself, and they both had the same sort of manic energy. And you finally, obviously, when you introduce the character of the mother and you see something of their home life, you kind of understand where they come from. So it's building up the layers of complexity and the kind of layers of the characters by revealing, more about them by when you see, again, just like any human being, when you meet their family, when you see where they come from, you suddenly understand why they do what they do, and why they're possibly the more emotionally healthy versions of their own childhoods.
Well, yeah, because one episode of this series, the sort of extra length, hour-long one in the middle, episode 6, I think, is just a long flashback set at Christmas in the Bizarro household, about 5 years before the events of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Carby's brother was still alive, and they're all trying to cope with Christmas with their mum, and everyone's just buzzing around. It's one of the only episodes, apart from the finale, that does hit that same bare feeling of everything just clattering around and threatening to fall off the rails and barely holding itself together. And again, it's something this show does incredibly well, and because it's in this sort of family setting rather than the usual professional one, it's in some ways even more upsetting.
Yes, I mean, cooking Christmas dinner is a stressful and difficult experience. So yeah, again, they managed to convey the chaos of a kitchen, again, like, this time, again, possibly the most important meal of the year. It's difficult to cook. I have cooked Christmas dinner for a family, not a family of this size, and it's stressful and difficult. And and also it exposes all of the other underlying tensions and things like that. The other thing, obviously, about that episode is they absolutely pulled out all the stops with the celebrity cameos.
Yeah. Nearly every member of Carmy's extended family
is famous.
Especially the ones who aren't, well, apart from the ones who you've seen in this show before, is played by someone fairly well known. Yeah, it's truly impressive. Bob Odenkirk turns up at one point.
Yeah, it's Uncle Lee. The character is probably not even mentioned before. Yeah, obviously, John Bernthal reprises his iconic cameo from the first season as the dead brother, again, when he was still alive. Jamie Lee Curtis playing the mum, as you mentioned also in the final episode. She's absolutely fantastic. Kind of playing against type as someone who is very dislikable, but she, really kind of shows why she's been a huge Hollywood star for so many decades, that she really can act and deliver a great performance. And she's got that huge star power that whenever she's on screen, you're drawn to her, which is, again, the kind of thing with this mother who's obviously a very dysfunctional human being. All the characters are kind of, their attention's always drawn towards her. So that's, again, the proper use of a celebrity cameo to get people's attention. Plus various other members, people in shows from Studio 60 and the Sunset Strip.
Yeah, Richie's ex-wife is played by one of the leads from Community. Yeah. It's a lot of people.
Yeah. There's even some famous faces in there that I recognise but can't exactly place. Bob Odenkirk cameo is exceptional.
Well, yeah, it works, I guess, because, again, as you say, because these people are all quite big stars, they have a certain sort of magnetism, and it works to sort of sell these scenes where you don't get that much time with them. It's, again, impressive how much you feel like you, I don't know might be a strong word, but certainly have a strong sense of these characters, despite only getting to see them for a tiny percentage of a 1 hour episode of television. Yeah,
there's also a sense of, in their family, there's lots of intergenerational conflict. Attention has always been pulled towards the older members of the family, so again, having them being famous people means the attention of the viewer is always moving towards them. I like the fact that also they don't feel the need to explain exactly all the complicated relationships of it or how the family fits together. Some of them are clearly friends, some found family, some relatives of different stripes, some relatives partners. You get a sense it's a big family. There's lots of confusing interconnectedness, but the show is basically doesn't feel like, okay, I must lay out exactly how everyone's related to who and who everyone is. It's just Christmas. It's like you just walked into their family Christmas. You're just thrown in. You've got to figure it out yourself. You assume that Uncle Lee is someone's uncle. But it might even just be a term of endearment. So
yeah. I mean, it's overwhelming in all the ways. Like, there's a lot of scenes where the dialogue is just people shouting over each other, where realistically you're not going to make out more than a word or two anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
As I say, it's very devoted to this sort of immersive, chaotic family Christmas experience, and just as a short piece in itself, it's great. As context for the wider show, it's very good as well.
Yes, but it provides that essential character bit as well, and shows where they come from and what their background like and what their sort of childhood is like, which shapes why these characters are incredibly highly strung and highly stressed. Is that basically their life has always been like this. They don't know anything else, which again feeds into Carmy's inability to take some simple, calm happiness, because it's just basically an alien concept to him.
As I say, after season 1 I was a bit, do we need any more of this? Season 2 I think has sensibly devoted itself to sort of deepening the world in a way that makes you think, okay, we probably do need at least one more season of this. I do suspect that, I don't know, it feels like something that might be a trilogy structure to me. It feels like they may have, taken the second season part whatever, to do some character building and take the lead character as low as they can get him, and then possibly he will have some sort of Phoenix-like rise in the 3rd season, then it will end. That would make sense to me, but also if we end up going up to season 5, that would probably work as well.
I mean, as long as they can keep coming up with new ideas, new ways of expanding the drama without, obviously, the way some shows go off the road by just throwing in more and more characters and things like that. I mean, the show is called The Bear, and it's about the restaurant, which is stroke diner, which is called The Bear. So yeah, and obviously the end of this, they've just relaunched it as a a fancy hipster type destination restaurant. I guess the plot of the next season is, will this be a success? They've only been open for one night, and already the cracks are starting to show. Will this be a success? They've taken out loads of debt. They've staked their credibility and their emotional lives on this. So yeah, there's drama there. Who knows where it'll go after that. I think you're right, probably 3-act structure sounds good. We're at the sort of the Act 2 low point. One more season to finish it off. But yeah, I don't know if they can keep coming up with new ideas. Maybe it could run for longer.
Yeah, at this point, certainly if they continue to be as good at this, they can do what they want. I'm extremely happy with this. I don't know if it's going to be number 1 show of the year, but I would be amazed if this isn't in the top 5, probably top half of top 5.
Yeah, same here. I've seen a few people pointing out that it's always listed as comedy drama and it's very sort of tense and unpleasant, but actually I do feel there are some genuine moments of levity. It's quite a dry humour and it's very character based. It's not silly pratfalls or people being ridiculous like what we do in the shadows, but there are some absolute just occasional moments when you're like, that's absolutely hilarious. Especially during the Christmas one, there's a bit when Richie's filming 2 friends of his doing a TikTok dance in the hallway. It's just not really explained why they're doing that, but yeah, they're just filming this dance. And it's just like a long sequence. It's very, very funny. So yeah, it does have its moments of levity in amongst the screaming and the emotional fireworks.
Yeah, but it's a show that gets a lot of praise, as we have just done for some time, for its characterisation, its emotional depth, that sort of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of good jokes in here as well. Plus, the whole construction site rebuilding the restaurant storyline does give them a lot of opportunities for ha-ha, the wall's fallen down.
Yeah.
Ha-ha, he's fallen through the wall. Ha-ha, the ceiling's collapsed on Richie. That sort of thing.
Yeah. Then again, incredibly tense when they have to do the fire safety test. I never thought that fire regulations could be a source of such tension.
Yeah, surprising amount of emotional catharsis in those few seconds.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing a new comic from Boom Studios by Cy Spurrier, Charlie Adlard, and Sophie Dodgson. Ellie Hawthorne is an East End Cockney and niece of the biggest bastard demon summoner in London. When he dies, and 72 demons are released from hell that end up in the hands of gangsters and dodgy businessmen, Ellie and a few unlikely friends have to track them down and send them home. We've read the first 6 issues of this new comic. Nick, what do you think of it?
As a fan of a decent sort of trenchcoat urban fantasy series, this was a decent time. There's definitely a sort of tropiness to this sort of amateur magician who sort of stomps around cynically solving magic problems, and this is, I think, partly just a good version of that. I think there's a lot of enjoyable world building. There's a lot of enjoyable sort of anti-hero material. Like, I appreciate his willingness to have the lead character Elle be at times full on unpleasant. Some anti-heroes are just sort of grumpy heroes, but Elle is at times genuinely hard to root for, and it's interesting to see where Spurrier takes this in future volumes. But yeah, it's got an interesting sort of take on demons. They're more like animals, I guess. I guess the moral of the story, humans are worse than demons, is, relatively clear, but it's not too hammered over the head, and I like the sort of world building. I like the fact it's quite a dense read with quite a lot of words and quite a lot going on. And like a lot of Cy Spurrier's work, I think it rewards paying attention. So yeah, I like this.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of sort of like twists and sleight of hands and tricks as well, which again, yeah, as you say, rewards paying attention to. Which, to be fair, this is, as well as being a supernatural urban fantasy story, it's a crime story. So the intricacies of the power plays, it reminds me of the twisting turns of like a Guy Ritchie film, or again, Matthew Bourne film like Layer Cake or something like that. Again, both of them being East End crime films. So yeah, it's got that element. It's not really breaking new ground in terms of like sort of urban fantasy or kind of crime story, in that there's a lot of like quite familiar East End kind of character types. There's the hard drinking, hard swearing, hard fucking hero. Woman this time, slightly different. There's the cop ally. There's a kind of an old school craze style East End crime lord. I haven't got into the sort of, I don't know, anything involving modern gangs or crime or things like that. But there is a kind of really good sort of urban fantasy story here, looping in kind of, magical creatures from a whole range of mythologies, as some of the best urban fantasy kind of stories do, like Rivers of London again, another good example that does that. And it's, so here we're doing a similar thing, mixing in different stuff from demons to angels to Baron Samedi at one point.
Yeah, and I think possibly to sort of counteract the vaguely sort of lofty, aloof nature of a lot of the actual like creatures and story, Suspiria ties it in quite hard to, a sense of emotion, often quite bleak emotion. There's not really any sanitising of what produces quite sad, quite fucked up people like a lot of the lead characters. They've all had, a bit of a time. Yeah,
there's a lot of trauma in the backstories, which are filled in quite neatly. Yeah, obviously Ellie's been raised by her uncle, in sort of tragic circumstances, who again, he's a bit of a bastard. It's kind of like baked into the plot and is rubbed off on her. The various other characters' traumas either filled in their immediate backstory or something traumatic happens to them in like the first few issues. It is also, quite violent. It's not something that gets away from the simple violence of the fact that being hit in the head with a magic hammer is still the same as being hit in the head with a hammer, which is really like actually quite unpleasant.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of good sort of, as well as, the more visceral emotions to make sure this lands, there's also some, visceral violence. Like, it's no sort of, and then I zapped him with a bolt and he went poof and vanished. It's all very, that person's been hit in the eye with a hammer. That person's been eaten by a massive dog. Yeah, it's all very tangible.
Yeah. I thought the demons were presented in a very interesting way. They're kind of, I don't know, they're sort of drawn in a very abstract way that kind of gives you a sense of what they're like, but more than actually showing you what they're like. I guess it does say that like they're kind of impossible to comprehend directly to look at. A lot of people go insane if they look at the demons or just refuse to believe they exist. And obviously, that sort of thing possibly slightly easier to capture in prose, sort of Lovecraft style prose, but harder to capture in the drawn form, or in film. But they do a good job of kind of using the kind of more abstract art, the slightly more impressionistic nature of doing something that's drawn rather than photographed, to kind of give you a sort of sense of what a demon looks like or is like, rather than like actually pinning it down.
Yeah, but I'm not an art expert, despite the handful of comics I've written. But I think Adlard's using a sort of quite inky crime realism style on most of the art, and then when the demons turn up, as you say, it's very sort of shape-based and impressionistic, and he's also, I think, maybe using some sort of digital distortion effects, ironically, I guess, on the sort of using the unnatural effects on the big natural monsters, but to sort of show the world changing.
Yeah, well, the unnatural effects on things that are beyond nature, I suppose, and they're from another world. Yeah,
and Adlard's art is very good here. He's obviously best known for drawing the lion's share of The Walking Dead, which, I guess gives him a good eye for, well, A, violence, and B, character emotion, which is the other main thing The Walking Dead is about, being basically a zombie soap opera. And he's very good at that. He's very good at low-key action that's being done here, like The Walking Dead often had some quite big zombie herds or quite violent people being ripped apart, but the sort of softer stuff with just the gang fights or people being punched in the face with hammers, turns out he's also good at that as well. He's just got a very strong eye for a certain level of sort of gritty violence.
Yeah, no, exactly. It works, and it works really well here. Yeah, we get much again looping in the kind of East End crime nature of it. I did also like in the art, and I suppose the writing as well, the use of real London locations, and also not just like the famous Richard Curtis London locations, such as the South Bank Centre Skate Park. There's a major scene that takes place down there. There's a few other well-known streets in London that I saw popping up, a few less known landmarks. So they've clearly researched actual locations in London for things to take down, but the sort of places actual Londoners go, not just tourists go.
Yeah, it does feel very grounded in location. It's not a sort of vague, wafty, abstract London. It's clearly quite there. In terms of the things it's sort of gesturing to, I think about a couple of years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago now, like pandemic era, Si Spurrier was actually writing Hellblazer, the old John Constantine series. And that story, well, his run on that series was cancelled in the end. It was very well reviewed, but I don't think the pandemic made it easy for it to succeed. It's a shame. It was a good run. The Si Spurrier Hellblazer run is worth a look if you're listening to this and you have the ways and the means. But I think there is a certain viewing of this series as him kind of taking a second bite of that. The way with the vague idea that Ellie's uncle is kind of a John Constantine analogue, and this is kind of him doing Hellblazer the Next Generation. Although I do think that the world building is quite different with the way he's approached the demons, and also Hellblazer isn't as much of a crime series as this clearly is. I think he's probably got to be aware that this will be perceived in that way, but I think he's also making some effort to pivot away from it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, he's got unfinished business with the genre. But no, I can definitely see that with the connection to the father figure. Again, being a hard-drinking, foul-mouthed East Ender, that's definitely part of it. And part of the appeal here. Yeah, and like I say, it's not necessarily breaking new grounds in terms of originality, but the story is well told. There's tension, there's payoff to each issue, which, drives you forward. So it's definitely an entertaining read.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how he'll stop the sort of the gotta catch 'em all vibe, I guess, of the premise from getting samey. I mean, you have to assume he's aware of that risk since he makes a few jokes about Pokemon in the comic.
Yeah.
It just becoming a sort of, let's get this demon type thing. I assume he's, got ideas for that.
It's interesting how the demonic lore is kind of dripped in through pages that are inserted that appears to be from the uncle's notes, I guess, or some kind of handwritten compendium of demons he's put together. Again, in his sort of East End drawl, using East End slang and calling just demons bastards and stuff, and shying away from the archaic language that the kind of more pretentious demonologist characters in the book use. But there's these kind of insert pages that kind of interrupt the flow of the kind of graphic story with a kind of info dump. But they were written in an interesting, exciting way to read, but also they provide you with like a bit of world building, a bit of necessary exposition, and a sort of a pause in the action.
Yeah, no, very good fun. I mean, those have got a certain amount of traction in comics since House of X, Powers of 10, actually, the Jonathan Hickman X-Men miniseries.
Yes, it absolutely did remind me of those.
Yeah, that is very much, I think, the source, the patient zero of the proliferation of text pages in comics. Some people are not huge fans of this trend. I, in my usual fence-sitting way, take the vague, lofty attitude of, well, it's good when done well. We read New Burn, didn't we, by Chip Zdarsky and Jacob Phillips, and there was some in there as well. It's very much a thing that happens nowadays.
Yes, absolutely. Although I think this one lent more onto it, but I suppose necessarily explaining the nature of the demons is more a part of what they're doing. The comic also had an interesting sort of point of view switch around, in that there's also a sort of voiceover of text that just appears on a plain white background. So yeah, I guess like pure expositional dialogue, which comes from a different character's point of view. So yeah, I mean, I guess they're mixing kind of narrators, mixing kind of point of views, bringing as much info as possible to kind of build out the world in what is, I guess, only 6 short issues.
Yeah, and there's also a sort of a visual trick they use a fair bit in this comic, where the panels have like larger white spaces between them for chunks of text.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite nicely deployed. It really makes you, I don't know, it gives the moments this very sort of bang, bang, bang staccato feel, which I think works quite well.
Yeah, there's a rhythm to it as well, yeah, which is kind of like, it's the sort of, I guess, signature move for pacing. The other thing is, obviously, they've also played around with the speech bubbles a lot. The demons have weird colour around their speech bubbles, each different colour for each demon, to imply that they don't sound human, but there's lots of like bolds and bits in grey and stuff, and kind of type changes in the speech, which a little confusing at first, but I guess does serve to emphasise key points.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. I mean, I tend to read a lot of Si Spurrier stuff just because I enjoy his style, but yes, I will get the next volume of this once it's finished, which I think it's starting soon, so I'm excited.
Well, yeah, we've discussed his work, I think, at least twice before on the podcast.
Yeah, we did Cry Havoc and Way of X.
Yeah. Both of which were really good. So, yeah, I think we're usually down for something he's written. And once again, he's consistently provided a good story, an interesting world, some good characters, and, yeah, something that's quite readable.
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very, very much for listening. If you want even more, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com and enjoy our previous episodes, amazing articles, and whatever else is still up there. And if you like the experience, then please leave us a nice 5-star review, because we just love it. Thank you.
If you want more from us, you can follow us on Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast, and you can follow us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can get more from me on both Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky and Instagram by searching for Alistair Ball, and you can also find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And you can find me by searching my name on various social medias, including most likely Instagram and Blue Sky, or my website is nickbryan.com, where you can find some information about my self-published comics. Or you can come back here next episode when we will be covering the eco-activism movie How to Blow Up a Pipeline and the romance sci-fi comic Love Everlasting by Tom King and Elsa Chartier. Join us in a fortnight for those. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.